September 1938. German Chancellor Adolf Hitler threatens to unleash a European war unless the Sudetenland, a border area of Czechoslovakia on which the ethnic German population lives, is ceded to Germany. The leaders of Britain, France, Italy and Germany hold a conference in Munich between the 29th and 30th of September 1938 and agree to the German annexation of the Sudetenland in exchange for a pledge of peace from Hitler. To this conference, which is also known as the Munich Betrayal, the Czechoslovaks are not even invited. Less than 6 months later, on the 15th of March 1939, in flagrant violation of the Munich Agreement, Nazi Germany invades and occupies the Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia. Adolf Hitler himself arrives in Prague, and on the 16th of March 1939, by a proclamation from Prague Castle, establishes the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. More than 118,000 Jews living in the Protectorate find themselves under Nazi domination. One of them is Evelina Landová. Evelina Landová was born on the 25th of December 1930 in Prague, the capital of Czechoslovakia. Evelina's half-sister Lisa, from her mother's first marriage, was 10 years her senior. Evelina's father Emil worked his way up to own a horsehair processing company, and her mother Ilse was a housewife who came from a wealthy family. Ilse's father owned 2 houses in Prague, in which he rented apartments. Until Evelina was 3 years old, the family lived in the Bažička street in the city center of Prague. From there, the Landa family and their servant moved to a modern 4-bedroom apartment in Prague's quarter Letna. Evelina enjoyed going to school, walking in the park, as well as playing with her friends. On the 30th of January 1933, when Evelina was only 2 years old, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg. Soon after their assumption of power, Nazi leaders began to make good on their pledge to persecute German Jews. Throughout the 1930s, the Nazis pursued an aggressive foreign policy, and behind the scenes they began planning territorial expansion and a European war. The first act of territorial expansion committed by Nazi Germany was the annexation of the neighboring country of Austria into the German Reich, also known as the Anschluss. This event took place over 3 days, between the 11th and 13th of March 1938. In the weeks that followed, there was pogrom-like violence across the country. Austrian Nazis and others beat up, attacked, and humiliated the Jews. They forced them to scrub the streets, clean public toilets, and perform humiliating exercises. Many tried to leave Austria, and lines appeared at consulates across the city of Vienna. Among the refugees were relatives and friends of the Landa family, who came to Prague and told the Landas about what was happening to the Jews in Austria. Until then, Evelina did not know that she and her parents were Jews, as her family was secular and non-religious. Suddenly, her feeling of security began to shake. Things changed for the worse in Czechoslovakia in October 1938, when Hitler annexed the Sudetenland, where the ethnic German population of Czechoslovakia lived. This border area of Czechoslovakia also contained the army's defensive positions in the event of a war with Germany. On the 15th of March 1939, Hitler violated the Munich Agreement and took over the Czechoslovak state. The Czech provinces of Bohemia and Moravia were proclaimed a German protectorate and were occupied by German forces. Immediately after the Nazis usurped the Czech lands, they passed new anti-Jewish laws, which were designed to exclude Jews from society and restrict their livelihood. Jewish accounts were frozen, and they were forbidden to sell companies and real estate, which were confiscated and taken over by the Germans. The Landas were no exception. They were ordered to vacate their 4-bedroom apartment and move into one of the apartments that belonged to Evelina's grandfather. In the 4-bedroom apartment lived 4 families, one in each room. One of those families were the Landas. From the 1st of September 1939, when the Second World War began, the Jews were not allowed to stay outdoors after 8 o'clock in the evening. They were also banned from entering certain streets, parks, cafés, hotels, and other public places. From August 1940 onwards, Jewish children were banned from attending public and private schools. Fortunately for Evelina, her father enrolled her in time in the only Jewish school in Prague, located in Hagibor Street. Because there was too little space for so many pupils, some classes took place in the morning and some in the afternoon. At the beginning of the classes, Evelina and other children prayed. They had no books, and teachers taught them what they considered could be useful for them. Together with other boys and girls, Evelina attended the Jewish school for 2 years from 1939 until 1941, and she was very happy there. From November 1940, new laws, decrees, guidelines and regulations increasingly restricted the civil and human rights of Jews in the Protectorate. They were not allowed to leave their municipalities, even temporarily, without special permission. Jews were forbidden to visit libraries, theaters and cinemas, swimming pools, sports facilities or concert halls. Jews had to hand over their jewels, music instruments, Persian carpets, antiques, telephones and radio sets, and they were not even allowed to keep pets. Evelina had to give away her canary, named Buntja. When traveling by city public transport or trains, they had to stand in the last carriage. The Jews even had a limited choice of foodstuff, and shopping times for them were limited to 2 hours twice a day, and later just 2 hours once a day. At 3 p.m. when they were allowed to do their shopping, most of the wares were already sold out. In addition, Jews were not allowed to have contact with non-Jews, or even to greet them in the street. From the 1st of September 1941, Jews in the Protectorate, including Evelina, were ordered to wear a badge of the Yellow Star of David when outdoors. Since they were not allowed in parks, Jewish children played after school in the old Jewish cemetery, or at the only sports ground where the Jews were allowed, the Hagibor. This was a large sports ground consisting of tennis and volleyball courts, a racetrack, and spaces where the Jewish children could play games and participate in competitions. All activities were organized by Fredy Hirsch, a German Jewish athlete, sports teacher, and Zionist youth movement leader who was dedicated to the youths. He was a very handsome man, always clean-shaved and well-groomed. Though he did not speak Czech well, he had authority. Children played games, sang and exercised. Those who lived in the Jewish quarter had to walk for an hour to get to Hagibor and an hour back home. Evelina and the others knew that Fredy was gay, but nobody paid attention to this. In November 1941, Reinhard Heydrich, the new acting Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, established the Theresienstadt Ghetto, which was located in the fortress town of Terezin. The first transport of Czech Jews arrived there in the same month. The ghetto existed for 3.5 years, between the 24th of November 1941 and the 9th of May 1945. Though the Landas family and other Jews thought that it was a place from which they would return after the war, Theresienstadt served mainly as a transit camp for Jews en route to extermination camps. It was also presented by the Nazis as a model Jewish settlement for propaganda purposes. Evelina and her parents arrived in the ghetto on the 2nd of July 1942. Deportees to the ghetto had to surrender all possessions, except for 50 kilograms or 110 pounds of luggage, which they had to carry with them from the railway end station at Bohušovice, 2.5 kilometers or 1.5 miles away. The walk was difficult, especially for the elderly and ill Jews. After reaching the ghetto, the prisoners were registered and distributed to the men's and women's barracks. Conditions in the camp were harsh. Lack of water and electricity, overcrowding, bed bugs, fleas and lice, and above all, no privacy. Food was distributed to all inmates from the central kitchens. It consisted of a portion of soup, usually made of lentil powder, and a potato or dumpling with gravy. Never fruit or vegetables. A quarter loaf of bread for 2 days and a spoonful of jam were distributed in the rooms. The prisoners were hungry, many were sick. 200 inmates were dying daily, diseases were rampant. Conditions in the ghetto varied depending on the prisoner's status. Most prisoners were squeezed in rooms with 60 to 80 people per room. They slept on 3-tiered wooden bunks. For older children, there were also several separate boys' and girls' heims, meaning homes. In their rooms, there was usually a table and a bench in addition to the bunks. Evelina stayed with girls her age in room number 28 of the Heim L 410, which was the children's home. This was arranged by her sister Lisa, who was in Theresienstadt with her husband Franta since December 1941. Evelina later recalled, "When I think of the really bad years of the war and the Holocaust, there is always a bright point, a beam of light on my mind. Our Heim in the ghetto, our room 28. I spent 18 months in Terezin. It is not much in an adult's life, but in the life of a child who is barely 12, it's almost an eternity. The Heim helped me endure much hardship. However, only 15 girls out of the nearly 60 who occupied room number 28 were so fortunate." The prisoners spent their waking hours either on the bunk, queuing for their meal, or at work. All prisoners aged 14 to 60 or 65 had to work. Most were involved in war production for Germany or in the vegetable gardens. Evelina, though, only 12, also worked in the garden growing vegetables for the SS kitchen. In addition, she was taught drawing by Friedel Dicker-Brandjesova, a well-known painter who worked with children in the ghetto. Evelina's father Emil worked in the administration office and her mother Ilse worked as a nurse. The ghetto was administered by the Jewish elders, among them Fredy Hirsch, who was head of the Children and Youth Department. His intention was to keep the children somewhat insulated from the harsh conditions of the ghetto, so that they would not succumb to demoralization. It was he who managed to find for them better housing in the so-called Heims. Although education was forbidden, the prisoners, many of them former professors, scientists and artists, continued to clandestinely teach the children in the Heims. During our interview, Evelina expressed doubts about the fact that the Germans did not know about this clandestine teaching, saying that the Nazis did not care, as in the end all Jews were going to be murdered. Of the approximately 140,000 Jews transferred to Theresienstadt, nearly 90,000 were deported to points further east, and almost certain death. Roughly 33,000 died in Theresienstadt itself, mostly from malnutrition and disease. Out of 15,000 children who passed through Theresienstadt, approximately 90% perished in killing centers. On the 26th of October 1942, less than 48 hours after the arrival of the last transport from Theresienstadt to Treblinka, the SS dispatched the first transport to Auschwitz, carrying 1,866 persons. Upon arrival, SS officials selected 247 people, mostly men, to be registered as prisoners. The remaining 1,619 were killed in the gas chambers. In December 1943, the Landas were selected for deportation to the working camp in the east, so they were told. Evelina's pregnant sister Lisa, together with her husband, stayed behind. Evelina later recalled, "In Terezin, I was deprived of my childhood. I became an adult. I began to think. I came to Terezin as a little 11-year-old girl, but when I left the ghetto in a December transport to Auschwitz, I felt almost an adult." In the cattle wagons which were used to deport Jews from Theresienstadt to Auschwitz, there was no toilet, only a bucket, which was overflowing within a few hours. The stench of urine and excrement added to the humiliation and suffering of the deportees. Lacking food and water and proper ventilation, a few of the deportees died before the trains reached their destination. The journey took a day and a night, snow was everywhere, and it was the first time in Evelina's life that she traveled so far. Armed guards accompanied the transport, and they had orders to shoot anyone who tried to escape. Evelina realized that they had lost, and was overwhelmed by such fear that she started to scream and cry hysterically. However, the worst was yet to come. Thanks for watching the World History channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.